A 29-year-old man walked into Krome Detention alive and healthy. Less than 3 months later, he was dead. Hi, I'm Radical Jezebel, and this is the story of Genry Ruiz, Donaldo, Guillen. The deeper I dug into this case, the harder it became for me to buy the story that ICE had sold the public. You see, before his transfer to Krome, Genry had spent 4 months at Hillsborough County Jail. According to ICE's own records, there was no documented schizophrenia, no psychosis, no documented history of the kind of mental health crisis that would eventually be blamed for his death. For 4 months, and then he arrived at Krome. At first, nothing seemed unusual. His intake record showed a perfectly healthy individual who was cleared for general population. Just another day, another detainee, another few hundred tax dollars entering a for-profit prison. No big deal. But less than a week later, something changed. Genry started getting dizzy. Not once, but over and over. Again and again, the records describe dizziness. Soon, it escalated to falls, fainting, ER visits. And as I read through the timeline, I couldn't stop thinking about what was happening around him. Because for decades, Krome has been making headlines, and not in a good way. Former detainees, attorneys, and advocacy groups had been describing overcrowded housing units, people sleeping on floors, limited access to showers, medical neglect, lack of access to adequate drinking water. These are all allegations, of course. Allegations that have been consistently made and at times found to be true since the 1980s. But when you read Genry's ICE medical records and his autopsy, those allegations become a lot harder to ignore because over and over, the same words keep appearing. Increased fluids, drink water, increased fluid intake. At one point, according to these records, he was given 3 cups of water and reportedly improved. But whatever was happening to him didn't stop. The dizziness, falls, and fainting soon gave way to seizures and multiple hospital visits. As I studied these documents, I also noticed a red flag. Despite the worsening medical problems, the story increasingly became about his mental state. Confusion, disorientation, psychosis. Things that, to me at first, sounded like potential symptoms of his underlying condition. But as I looked closer at his autopsy, I found his toxicology report. The man who walked into detention with no documented history of schizophrenia died with a toxicology report spanning multiple pages. Anti-anxiety drugs, antipsychotics, sedatives, sleep medications, medication metabolites. More than a dozen different drug compounds were detected in his system. And that raised another question. At what point did this become a psychiatric case? Because when Genry arrived at Krome, that's not who the records described. Here's what I keep coming back to. What if those psychological symptoms weren't the beginning of his story? What if they were the end of it? Because severe medical problems can sometimes affect the brain too. That theory was bolstered by the records, which started using diagnoses that sounded less like psychiatry and more like a body in crisis. One diagnosis meant that there was too much sodium in his blood. Another meant his body had become severely concentrated from fluid imbalance. Yet another meant his muscle tissue was breaking down and releasing proteins that can damage the kidneys. And on top of that, doctors were documenting dangerous electrolyte abnormalities. By this point, Genry wasn't just dizzy anymore. He was clearly deteriorating. On January 22nd, records showed he had a dangerously low potassium level of 2.1. To put that into perspective, the normal range is between 3.5 and 5.2. The next day, he would be pronounced dead. The official cause of death would later be listed as complications of schizoaffective disorder. When I read the timeline from beginning to end, I don't see a healthy man who suddenly became ill. Neither did Dr. Anita Patel, a double board certified pediatrician and pediatric critical care doctor and associate professor of pediatrics who agreed to give me her analysis on Genry's case. We saw a man who walked into Krome on his own 2 feet and then slowly began to collapse. And the question that keeps me awake at night is simple. What really happened between the day he arrived and the day he died? Because somewhere in that timeline lies the answer. Electrolyte imbalances can be caused by dehydration, which can also lead to all of the diagnoses he had: hyperosmolarity, hypernatremia, rhabdomyolysis, organic catatonic disorder, seizures, confusion, even psychosis. But because he was on at least 3 antipsychotics and 1 antidepressant at the time, other experts who were consulted by the Miami Herald said they believed his death could have been caused by a rare but deadly reaction to antipsychotics called neuroleptic malignant syndrome. And I'm not claiming that that's what happened for sure here. I'm just laying out the facts for you to decide. Because to me, it sure as hell looks like it all leads back to one thing: water.